All right, let's dive into a really provocative take on politics. Today we're going to be unmasking the politician, but we're going to do it through the incredibly sharp and, let's be honest, pretty cynical eyes of the writer H.L. Mencken.
So Mencken kicks things off with this one really powerful metaphor. He calls the politician the courtier of democracy. Now, what on earth does that actually mean? As you're about to see, it is definitely not a compliment.
And that really boils down to this one question he wants us to wrestle with. What does it mean to flatter the mob in order to rule it? This is the central puzzle that Mencken lays out for us.
Okay, so let's really unpack that core idea. We'll start with our first section, the courtier of democracy. So to get this, we need a little historical context. Mencken says that a courtier's entire job, their art, was to flatter their boss so they could ultimately take advantage of them. You know, to pretend to give in to them as a way of actually controlling them. Sound familiar? Well, Mencken argues the modern politician does exactly the same thing.
And this idea, well, it leads us straight into our next section, the politician's two faces. Because according to Mencken, there's a massive gap between what we see and what we actually get.
And here, Mencken lays out this stark contrast, right? On one hand, you've got the public image, the politician as this selfless altruist, totally devoted to public service. But behind the curtain, he claims they're actually a rogue, whose one and only goal is their own self-interest.
And Mencken, being Mencken, has this incredibly blunt, almost funny way of putting it. His principle, and often sole aim in life, is to butter his parsnips. In other words, it's all about looking out for number one.
Okay, so if the politician is just this self-interested courtier, how do they get any power? Well, that brings us to our third point, that power comes directly from the people.
Mencken actually made up a term for the common citizen, homo vulgaris, and let's just say his opinion wasn't exactly flattering. He argues that the average person doesn't really like individual liberty. Instead, they crave the safety of the herd, which of course makes them much easier to manage.
So in the end, a politician's power, in Mencken's view, isn't about their own strength at all. Nope, it's about exploiting the public's weaknesses. Things like, the difficulty people have in grasping really complex issues, their tendency to get worked up by preposterous alarms, and even their envy of people they see as their superiors.
All right, so if that's the playing field, what kind of skills does a politician need to win? Well, this brings us to what Mencken called the art of deceit.
See, in Mencken's world, the art of politics has basically two main branches that work together. And his take on it, it's that they're both pretty degrading for anyone who has to practice them.
So first up, you've got the demagogue. And man, just look at that definition. It is absolutely brutal. A demagogue is someone who preaches ideas they know are false to people they consider to be idiots. He really doesn't mince words.
And then, on the flip side of that coin, you have the demoslave. Now, this is the person who listens to what those same idiots have to say and then just pretends that they believe it themselves. It's all about mirroring public opinion, no matter how wrong he thinks it is.
And here's the real kicker. Mencken's claim is that anyone, and I mean anyone, who wants to get elected has to be one of these two things. But the reality? He says most of them have to be both. It's basically a required skill set for the job.
So what happens to a person after a whole career built on this stuff? What's the ultimate cost? That's what Mencken explores in our final section, the price of power.
And Mencken just paints this grim picture with a series of absolutely devastating phrases. First, this one, he knows the taste of boot polish. A pretty clear metaphor for the debasing things you have to do to get ahead.
And their whole public life, it's just one big act. As he puts it, his public life is an endless series of evasions and false pretenses.
But what does all that do to a person on the inside? What's actually left of them after years of this? Mencken delivers this crushing final verdict. Vanity remains to him, but not pride.
And that right there, that complete loss of real pride, that's the ultimate price they pay. And why do they pay it? For what Mencken so poetically calls the clapper-clawing of the vulgar. Basically, for the roar of the crowd in a democracy.
So we're left with this really big question, aren't we? Is this portrait of the politician, written a century ago, just a cynical old relic from a different time? Or is it a timeless warning that feels just as relevant today?